Ryan lay curled up on her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The events of the past few weeks felt like a whirlwind, leaving her both emotionally and physically drained. That day, Jungkook discovered her scars. Everything changed. His anger and the intensity in his eyes when he saw the marks left by her arms. Abuse were unlike anything she had ever seen before. She knew he was possessive and that he had a temper, but seeing him react too strongly to her pain was confusing. It was almost as if he cared, but why would he? She was just a maid, just someone he took in and claimed as his. Jungkook had been different since that night. He wasn't cruel or harsh with her anymore. Instead, he seemed more protective. Watching over her like a hawk, it made her uneasy, not knowing what to expect from him. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting a warm glow across the mansion, Jungkook entered Wine's room without knocking. He leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed over his chest, and watched her with an unreadable expression. Wine, he said softly, his voice gentler than she had heard it in a long time. Wine sat up slowly, wary of his tone. Yes. Jungkook took a deep breath and walked over to sit beside her on the bed. I want to talk to you about something. He said, his eyes searching hers. I know I have been difficult and I know I have hurt you. Wine's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know where this was going. Jungkook, he held up a hand to stop her. Let me finish. He said quietly, I need you to understand something. I may be rough and I may be possessive, but I never wanted to hurt you. When I saw those scars on your body, I realized I have been a fool. I have been treating you not well. But you're a person, you have been through so much, and I'm sorry for making things harder for you. Wine blinked, stunned by his words. She had not expected this from him, not after everything. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Jungkook reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. Just let me take care of you. Let me make things right. Wine wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he could change, that he could be someone who cared for her, but she wasn't sure if it was possible. Why do you want to help me now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. Because I see you, Wine. I see the pain you have been hiding, and I see how strong you are. I want to be the one to protect you from now on. Wine felt a lump from in her throat, her eyes filling with tears. She had never felt so vulnerable, and yet a part of her wanted to trust him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Wine found herself slowly growing accustomed to life in the mansion. Chunk's behavior continued to shift. He was softer, more considerate, but still possessive. It was as if he was trying to prove to her that he could be someone else could rely on. Despite his efforts, Wine couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled in her stomach. She was living in a world that felt like it could crumble at any moment. One wrong step, one wrong word, and everything could change. One night, Wine was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. Jungkook had gone out earlier, saying he had some business to attend to. It wasn't unusual for him to disappear for hours, leaving her alone in the massive house. She tried not to think about what he was doing or who he was with. It was late when she finally heard the front door open. She paused, listening closely. The footsteps were uneven, stumbling slightly. Wine's heart sank. She knew that sound. It was the sound of someone who had been drinking. Jungkook appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, leaning heavily against the frame. His shirt was slightly untucked and his hair was messier than usual. There was a dazed look in his eyes, a look that made Wine's heart race with anxiety. Jungkook, she said softly, trying to gauge his mood. Are you okay? He laughed, a bitter sound that he could in the quiet kitchen. Okay. No, I'm not okay. Wine, I'm far from it. Wine took a cautious step back, her hands trembling as she placed the dishcloth on the counter. Maybe you should go to the bed. She suggested gently, I will bring you some water. Jungkook shook his head, pushing himself off the door frame and stumbling toward her. No, I don't want water, I want you, he muttered, his voice thick with alcohol. Before she could react, Jungkook grabbed her arm and pulled her against him, his grip firm and yielding. Wine gasped, trying to pull away, but he was too strong. His lips crashed down on hers, rough and demanding, and she could taste the bitterness of the alcohol on his breath. Jungkook, stop, she pleaded, her voice muffled against his mouth. You're drunk, you don't know what you are doing. He didn't listen. He was lost in his own world, his hands roaming over her body with that desperation that scared her. Wine tried to push him away, her heart pounding in her chest, but held her tight, his breath hot against her neck. You're mine, he whispered fiercely. You belong to me, Wine. Don't you get it? I can't let you go. I need you. Wine's eyes filled with tears as she struggled against him. She had never seen him like this before, so vulnerable and yet so terrifying. She didn't know what to do, how to make him stop. All she could do was beg. Please, Jungkook, she cried. Please don't do this, not like this. Her words seemed to reach him, if only for a moment. He froze, his grip on her losing slightly as he looked into her eyes. One could see the conflict in his gaze. The battle he was fighting within himself. For a brief second, she thought he might let her go, but then his expression hardened and he pulled her closer. His voice a low growl in her ear. I told you, he said roughly, you are mine. And with that, he pushed her back against the counter, his hands moving to undress her. Wine closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek as she felt him taking control, his body pressing against hers. The night passed in a blur of confusion and fear. Wine didn't know how much time had passed, how long she had been trapped in his arms, but eventually the intensity of his action softened and he fell asleep beside her, his breath steady and even. Wine lay there staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing with a thousand thoughts. She felt a mix of anger and sadness, fear and confusion. She didn't know what to do, how to feel. All she knew was that everything had changed again, and she was once more at the mercy of a man she didn't understand. The following morning, Chokok woke up with a splitting headache, the sunlight streaming through the windows, making him groan. He sat up slowly, his mind foggy with the remnants of last night's call. He glanced over at mine, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to him. His heart sank. He remembered bits and pieces of the night before, his drunken behavior, the way he had grabbed her, his rough words. Shame and guilt washed over him as he realized what he had done. Wine, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry. Wine didn't turn around, she stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. You were drunk, she said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. You didn't know what you were doing. Jungkook reached out, wanting to touch her, to comfort her, but he stopped himself, unsure if this touch would be welcome. That's no excuse, he said, his voice filled with regret. I hurt you, I promised I wouldn't, and I did. Wen finally turned to look at him, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to think, Jungkook. I don't know how to feel. Jungkook nodded, his heart itching at the sight of her pain. I know, he said softly, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. When I was scared. Scared of what? She asked, her voice trembling. Of losing you, he admitted. of not being enough for you. I have never felt this way about anyone before, and it scares me. I don't know how to handle it. Wine sighed, wiping away a tear. Wine sat silently, processing everything Jungkook said. The room felt heavy with the weight of their emotions. The aftermath of the previous night left her feeling confused and hurt. But beneath all that, she sensed a vulnerability in Jungkook she hadn't seen before. I don't know what you want from me, Jungkook, Wine whispered, her voice breaking the silence. One moment you are kind, and the next you are cruel. Jungkook finished for her, his tone laden with regret. I know, and I'm sorry. I want to be better, Wine, for you. Wine wanted to believe him, but doubt clouded her mind. She stood up, needing some space to think. I need some time. She said softly, to figure out what all this means. Jungkook nodded, understanding. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Days passed, and a sense of normalcy returned to the mansion. Wine tried to forget the confusion of that night, but something was different. She felt nauseous in the mornings. Her emotions were all over the place, and she was constantly tired. At first, she brushed it off as stress from the tumultuous situation with Chongko. But as the days went on, the signs became clearer. One afternoon, when she was alone, Wine decided to take a pregnancy test just to be sure. Her hands trembled as she waited for the result, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she would do if it was positive. Finally, the results appeared. Two lines. Once breathed hissed, she was pregnant. Panic set in, and a million thoughts raced through her mind. What would she tell Jungkook? How would he react? Would he even want the baby, or would he see it as a mistake? The fear of his reaction overwhelmed her. She knew he cared about her in his own way, but this was different. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about a child, a future. One day, Wine kept the news to herself. Unsure how to approach Jungkook, she tried to act normal, but the anxiety gaunt at her constantly. She couldn't keep it a secret forever, but she was terrified of what might happen when he found out. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Jungkook noticed her distant expression. Wine, what's wrong? He asked, his voice full of concern. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. I have to tell you something, she stammered. Jungkook's brow furrowed with worry. What is it? Taking a deep breath, Wine finally blurted out, I'm pregnant. The room fell into a deafening silence. Jungkook stared at her, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. What? He whispered, as if he had not heard her correctly. I'm pregnant, Jungkook. Wine repeated, her voice trembling. I found out a few days ago. Jungkook sat back, running a hand through his hair. His mind raced as he processed the news. A child. He hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for it. But as the shock wore off, a strange calm settled over him. Are you okay? He asked carefully, his eyes searching hers. Why nodded slowly? I'm scared, she admitted. I didn't know how to tell you. I wasn't sure how you'd react. Jungkook reached out, taking her hand in his. I'm shocked, he confessed. But I'm not angry, Vian. I'm just surprised. Tears welled up in Vian's eyes as relief washed over her. I thought you wouldn't want the baby, she said quietly. Jungkook squeezed her hand, his expression softening. It's unexpected, yes, but it's our baby. Wine, I'm not going to turn my back on you or our child. Wine's heart swelled with emotion. She had feared his rejection, but instead she saw a determination in his eyes that gave her hope. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook took a deep breath. We face this together, he said firmly. We will figure it out. Wine, and if you will have me, I want to do this right. Taking her hand in his, I'm shocked. He confessed. Wine looked at him, confusion evident in her eyes. What do you mean? Wine knelt before her. I mean, I want to marry you. Why? Not because of the baby, but because I want to be with you. I want to be the man you need me to be, and I want to be a good father to our child. Wine's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected this. Marry me? She repeated as if trying to make sure she heard him correctly. Jungkook nodded, his gaze steady. Yes, I know I have made mistakes and I know I have hurt you, but I want to make things right. I want to build a life with you. Wine, a real one. Tears streamed down Wine's cheeks as she listened to his words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the hope that he could be better, and despite everything, a part of her believed him. Okay, she whispered, a small smile breaking through her tears. Let's do it. Let's try to make this work. Jungkook's face lit up with a rare smile, relief flowing through him. He pulled Wine into a tight embrace, holding her close as if he never wanted to let her go. We will figure this out together. He promised softly, no more running, no more hiding, just us and our family. Wine nodded against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had not felt in a long time. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't alone. They still had a long road ahead of them, but with Jungkook by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find their way.